The wood floors are being installed by Steve Triplett and his crew at Wood Floors West. The first time I met Steve, he was 21 years old and working for his uncle installing wood floors on an addition that I had done in another part of the county. It's been a pleasure watching him grow up in this craft and as a productive member of our community. Wood floors have been around for a long time. Wood is a wonderful product, right? I mean, there are so many things that can be done with wood. And hardwood is really a nice thing to have in the space that you're living in. Just like every other product, every other aspect of construction, it's changed a lot over the years. And Steve and his guys are right up to speed on the latest and greatest methods and materials and fasteners and glues and putties and fillers that are to be used in the 21st century, putting an oak floor in a pretty nice house. So the hardwood that's being put on the floor today is a white oak. It comes from Georgia. It appears to me to be exactly the same as the white oak that I fool around with out here that you've seen me putting on the railing. White oak is hard enough, stable when it's kiln dried. It sands easily and it planes easily and it stains uniformly and it's great. Now you might pick a more sort of spectacular or dramatic hardwood. Cherry, maple, hickory. Now hickory has lots of color variations. Or maybe you would price and consider a tropical hardwood, but you better be ready to get out your wallet when that comes along. And so it kind of brings us back to perhaps the reason that oak is what everybody thinks of when they think of a hardwood floor. It's hard, it's wood, and is reasonably priced. So all of these things being understood, the reason you use hardwood on a floor is because it takes terrible traffic. The reason you use softwood in a structure, firs and hemlocks and spruce and that sort of thing, is because it will flex and it's strong and it has characteristics that work better in a structural situation and work really almost not at all in a steady wear, abrasion resistant and finished surface situation where it has to remain beautiful over time. If you think about it, even a really nice fir board would be marred by dragging a chair. But a piece of white oak will stand a fair amount of abuse and still look nice. The first step is to get the subfloor perfectly flat with a sander. You may remember that we got a little rain on this deck back during the framing stages, and the edges of OSB will swell up a little bit and then go back down a little bit, but they still needed a light sanding. So once the floor was flat and perfectly clean, they start by rolling out Aqua Bar asphalt builder's paper to go under the flooring. This paper forms a vapor barrier that helps keep the moisture content of the flooring stable over time. It also provides a slick surface that helps the installers get the boards in place while they're laying out and getting ready to nail down the planks. Now, layout is important, and there are some rules to keep in mind. You should maintain at least a 4-inch stagger between adjacent butt joints. You should avoid long runs of uniform steps because a more random pattern looks best, and you should try to avoid H joints if you can. You've also got to keep an eye out for defects in individual boards as you're working and cut them out if possible. Steve is snapping a chalk line for the first row and then gluing and face nailing that initial row in place with a regular 15 gauge finish nailer just for the first 3 or 4 rows. After that, they switch over to the primary nail gun for this job, which is a Bostitch M3 stapler, which is tightening the joints as it is driving the staples in just above the tongue side of the board and down into the subfloor itself. Now once these guys get going, stand back. It's a very physical and full body job, as you can see, and they are hustling. Now generally it is more expensive to install a real solid wood floor like this one, at least initially. You can buy engineered woods and laminates that look great and can be installed in a lot fewer steps. A solid hardwood floor, however, can be resanded, refinished, repaired, and matched much easier. It's like a lot of other choices in construction. It's more expensive on the front end and much less expensive over the long term. So after a tree is cut down and it's cut into boards and the boards are dried and planed, in order to turn it into a piece of hardwood flooring, it has to be run through a planer molder to put a tongue and groove pattern on the edges. A tongue and groove pattern essentially makes, in our case, thousands of pieces of hardwood behave as if they are one continuous sheet. Now, it's one continuous sheet in its uniform dimension to the top. It's one continuous sheet in that it won't bend or flex this way, but it is not one continuous sheet in reducing the chance of buckling. So the tongue and groove does everything to tie it together into a sheet, as long as you can keep the moisture content stable. Now after the floor is nailed down and in place, the entire thing is coated with a trowel-on wood filler. This WOODWISE latex putty is not just a spot treatment, it's put on the whole floor. The raw wood itself is pretty rough, and this is the first step in a long sequence of steps that are designed to make the wood uniform. This means filling cracks, sanding and buffing, and then applying the top finished products, all of which you're going to see here shortly. This is really where the extra cost in a hardwood floor comes from. If this was a pre-finished wood floor, you would nail it down and basically be done. But with real hardwood, the more technical and labor-intensive part of the install is in the sanding and the finishing. So after the wood filler is in place, the entire floor is sanded and cleaned several times, starting with a 36 grit sandpaper and ending up with a 100 grit. This is done much like any other woodworking project, where you're slowly bringing the entire piece, in this case the whole floor, up to a uniform finish with all the individual variations between the different planks smoothed out and any gaps or knots filled in. The big advantage of using a real wood floor and a 3/4 inch thick plank is that as long as this house is standing, the floor will always be able to be refinished. Anytime there's damage or wear that begins to become pronounced, sanders, buffers, sealers can be reapplied to this floor and make it look just like new. You can't do that with an engineered, pre-finished wood product. Dust control is just as important in this process as the sanding itself, and not simply to reduce the cleanup, which can be formidable, but because dust will wreck the beauty of the finish coat. So the job must be clean, I mean clean, before the final step of applying the finish. Once the floor is finished sanded and all cleaned up, a light mist of water is sprayed on to water pop the floor. This step raises the grain just a little bit so that it will take the stain evenly.
Regular old carpet?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, you gotta use used carpet too. The newer stuff has all the stain blockers in it.
Oh, is that right?
It'll keep the stain from getting into these again.
That's cool.
The stain is applied after the water pop. As you can see, the guys are being very careful with the floor at this point. They're keeping their shoes off of it to eliminate the chance of any outside dirt or rocks or scraps or oil getting inside and onto the wood, because they want to put this stain down in one shot as evenly as possible. Now there's a lot of choices on the color with stain, so make sure you test your stain out on some scraps before you commit. The stain that we went with is called Provincial, and it's sort of a medium shade, not too dark, not too light. The next step in our process is a seal coat. This is a coating that is rolled or painted on that seals the stain on the wood. It highlights the natural colors of the floor. It makes the colors stand out, and it's an important part of getting the correct final color that you were going for to begin with. Now there's lots of choices for specific products, and the one that Steve is using in our house is called BONA INTENSESEAL. Picking out and knowing how to use which products is where a professional's experience really comes into play. Immediately after the seal coat, the floor is given its first finish coat. The finish coats on a floor do at least two things. First, they protect. The finish is tough. It resists scratching. It's a protective layer, and it helps keep the water out for when the spills happen. It also provides the sheen, that is, how it reflects light, whether that's a gloss finish, that is more shiny, or a matte finish, which reflects less light. Depends on what look you're going for. Before the final finish coat is applied, these guys go over this floor with a fine-tooth comb, so to speak. They're looking for and marking any imperfections, small knots, gaps between the planks that may have opened up. These get marked and then filled with an oil putty, which is carefully selected to match the color of the finished floor as closely as possible.
Yeah, just little knot holes in everything that the filler came out of. And so we gotta use this color putty because the filler, it won't take the stain. As well, it'll stand out.
Got it. So it darkens it.
So we get a dark color putty, make sure it matches the stain. You guys gotta touch this all in. It's hard to know. Because I work for them.
Next, the floor gets its final sanding, which is actually just a buffing pass. This doesn't get anywhere near down into the wood itself. It just evens out any imperfections in the seal coat or the first finish coat.
Usually I can use it on another one up top.
You do a thing.
In a lot of ways, these stairs are the crown jewel of the project. And the treads come with the bull nose already molded onto the edge. But they are 1 inch thick, and the risers or faces are 3/4 of an inch thick, just like the flooring. Now you may remember that I had to account for these thicknesses in order to keep the stairs code compliant way back when I built these things for the second time. This nifty device is called a stair jig, and it is absolutely worth the $120 it costs if you ever have to do something like this. Not only does a stairway like this have to look good, it's got to stand up to a lot of abuse. Stairs take the most focused and consistent wear path in the whole floor. There's only one place that you're going to walk up and down these, and when furniture is moved up and down, I mean, you know, the stairs take a pounding. So Steve applied 5 coats of the finish to these treads, and he's doing a perfect job on the installation. But I've learned over the years that that's just the way he rolls. Now, one more thing to mention about applying the final finish coat is you got to keep all the doors, all the windows, or anything that moves air either off or closed. Even a slight breeze blowing across the floor can change the rate at which the finish cures or sets up, which can impact the uniformity of the finish. Remember the sheen? It's important that it is the same everywhere. And it's the same with sunlight. You need to try to do this at a time of the day when the sun won't be pounding in through a window and getting one spot on your wood floor nice and warm, which will change the appearance of that floor forever. So pay attention. Thank you for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.